Well, good morning everybody, and you may be glad to know that mine is not a technical presentation today. I'm not technical. This is far more about how the passenger boat operators and ourselves in particular are looking at this particular issue. Just 5 months ago, and a lot of stuff you've heard before, but I'm sure you should hear it many times because this is a very important piece of legislation which will affect our industry. But just 5 months ago, an email arrived from Roger Flitter, Secretary of the Passenger Boat Association, and most such emails are routine, and the subject matter gave no clue that its contents would be a bombshell to the entire industry. The subject line, of course, read, EU Fuels Directive, and that's what's brought us here today. Let me take a few moments to give you some context. The inland waterways passenger boat operators operate throughout the UK. There are many hundreds, not thousands, not many thousands, not hundreds of thousands, but many hundreds around the UK, and all but a very, very few are small and medium-sized enterprises. Many are family companies. Many are small operators who earn a living by operating 1 or 2 boats with their family, and they are very valuable to the community in which they work. They add employment in their communities, and they're at the heart of the tourist economy from both overseas and our home domestic market in our towns, cities, and seasides around the UK. So they are a very valuable community of operators. In the context of city cruises, we are one of the larger operators on the River Thames, with 14 boats operating on the tidal part of the river. And 14 boats, work boats, we have a total of 48 engines, which to me is an enormous number of engines to upkeep, maintain and keep running. Our 4 large river liners burn about 2,000 litres of fuel every week, and they're running for 3,500 hours a year. So we take a long, hard look at anything to do with boat fuel and engines. And the more we looked at this directive, the more worried we got. Now, I'm not an engineer, but I buy more than 500,000 litres of fuel every year. And some of you may know, but we began our business on the River Thames, owning and operating fuel barge Freddy at Westminster Bridge. So I know a little about the business of selling fuel, but not a lot about buying it in today's market. Over the last few months, we have found lots of scientific and technical information on low sulphur fuel and biofuel, but hard information and advice for operators has been very hard to find. And we've spent hundreds of hours searching through all the documents, and a lot of manpower has been spent trying to understand what this legislation will mean to us and how we can possibly take it forward, take our fleet forward to get ready. We need to look at the problems in 3 different ways. Okay, I've missed a slide, and I usually do that because I forget. I'm so interested in talking to you that I forget my slides. So let me find the right one we're on. Right, okay. We need to look at the problems in 3 different ways. The fuel, our engines and fuel systems, and the issue of cost and supply. If we are to meet the December deadline for the change to the new fuel, we must hope that today's proceedings will provide the insight we need, and the next meeting with the Department of Transport provide some real answers, because we're getting very, very short of time. We've heard about the fuel, so I won't go into it in any detail, but the cutback in sulphur content, to us, to all intents and purposes, it's a ban, and it's designed to reduce exhaust emissions. And increasing the use of biodiesel reduces our dependence on fossil fuels. So sulphur must be a bad thing, and biodiesel must be a good thing. Yes, but as the slide shows, it's not as simple as that, and we've heard some of the challenges already from Alan. The challenges for operators is to deal with the issues and in an impossibly tight timescale. So let's look first at the fuel supply. There are two kinds of fuel which comply with the new directive that we've heard about today. One is road diesel, the green diesel, that has been used in cars and trucks since 2009. The other is gas oil, the updated version of the red diesel most of us are using at present. We as operators need to know which fuel we can get and when. And that is, at the moment, a massive problem. Biofuel acts as a detergent. It will pick up some of the sediment in your fuel system. So we've been advised to clean the tanks and pipework before the new fuel arrives and be prepared to repeat the process a couple of times in the first few months. Well, if anybody has their tanks properly cleaned, you're talking about thousands and thousands of pounds for proper tank cleaning. It's not as easy as people might be saying that it is, I don't think. And moreover, the maintenance costs of the vessels from the engine manufacturers that we've spoken to so far intimate that the regular maintenance that we carry out all the time, perhaps at 500 hours, may need to go to 300 hours in order to keep our boats running. And that actually means a doubling of our maintenance costs. And as our repairs and renewals are by far the largest expense that we have in our company, and to most operators they will be, anybody who owns a boat knows don't own a boat because they're very, very expensive to look after and to maintain. So we have a real issue with what this is going to mean to us financially, and the big impact of the change, no doubt, is going to be a big financial impact on all operators to make this happen. The new fuel will be more expensive, and we're told that we will use more of it, which is a bit of a double whammy. Given the way fuel prices have increased in the last couple of years, that'll be a very bad thing for our industry. Because the gas oil market is so small, some fuel suppliers may not offer it in future and simply sell more expensive road diesel with an excise dye marker. But of course that road diesel will also have the biofuel content, which will cause most of the problems to our ships. The other thing is, because it is a relatively small market for the suppliers, we're going to be at a disadvantage coming in on the 1st of January 2011. It would be much better if we were aligned, if somebody had put some thought into this and aligned us with the introduction of the rail operators compliance, which is on the 1st of January 2012. They have a year's delay before their implementation. So we're going to be very much at the mercy of suppliers, whether we can actually get supplies and at what price it will be supplied. At the present, they're being very cagey about whether they'll offer it and also at what price. I don't know whether this is because they don't yet know or because they want to consider how much they can charge us when it's too late to shop around. The best guess so far, according to everybody else that tells me, is that the new fuel will cost at least 4p a litre, and I think that's the short end of the wedge that we're looking at. In our case, it adds £25,000 a year to the fuel bill before any increase in market prices, which is quite considerable. But that's only half of it, because you've also got a dramatic increase in maintenance costs across the whole fleet. The new fuel will be less efficient than current gas oil. In other words, you'll burn more fuel, so you will have an increased usage, which will add to your costs. And the train operators tell us they're assuming a 5% increase in fuel consumption. And you need to plan to cover the extra costs. And in this difficult recessionary times that we have, with a downturn in tourism, it is more difficult for boat operators to survive, let alone try to meet all these the additional burdens of costs. We need to look carefully at our fuel storage and fuel handling arrangements, we're told, to reduce the risk of water ingress. The top of the head advice is to keep tanks topped up to minimise the risk of condensation. And that sounds fine in theory, but what about the charter boats which may be tied up on moorings for 2 or 3 weeks without going to work, or longer, because the work is very spasmodic in that part of the industry. And the seasonal boats, and there are many, many of these around the country, who are only used occasionally for months at a time, and they're out of use for many months at a time. What's going to happen to the fuel in their tanks? How much will they need to throw away? How much will that add to their costs? Obviously, you need to plan. If you have a fuel tank or barge which does get contaminated, how easy will it be to clean it? Do you need to make modifications to the tanks now before it's too late? You need a real plan. I have heard worries from operators about access to the tanks to actually release water contamination. Some tanks have the ability to get underneath them to take the water out. Many, many, many tanks, even in some of the freight people, are really concerned about this. They don't have the ability to remove water from their tanks, and that is going to be a real problem. They can only remove it by emptying out and throwing away everything they've got. And that is a real issue, I think, for many, many people, probably far more than we actually know at the moment. You obviously need to talk to your engineers. We need to talk to our engineers, the engine manufacturers and other experts. But we're not really getting too much from anybody at the moment in terms of trying to get people to look at this and say this is only 9 weeks away. 10 weeks, 9 weeks, 10 weeks. I haven't got the days. I'm not like the Olympics. I can't tell you the days to when this comes in. But it's a very, very short time, and people aren't really getting themselves in gear to give proper advice and help to the small and medium-sized companies around the country that may need it. Will there need to be an additive to compensate for the loss of fuel or a change of lubricant? We'll have to have discussions on such thrilling topics as lubricity and TBN numbers, about which we have heard already today, and I'm sure we'll hear more. The main point of the plan is actually quite simple. We shall have to check everything, and on an ongoing basis. We'll have to look at the copper pipework. Sulphur inhibits the oxidation of copper in fuel, I understand. Take the sulphur out and you end up with copper deposits in the engine, and that's another bad thing. So some specialists are advising the replacement of all copper piping. You can either take the view that replacing the pipework can wait until the next major engine overhaul, or you can act now on the basis that you would rather pay the bill and have the boat out of service when you don't need it, rather than risk an engine failure at the height of the season in July or August. And our industry is very cyclical. You can lose money for 6 months of the year and earn money for 6 months of the year, and they both have to be in balance. So there are real problems if you do decide to leave it until your peak season, you break down, because that's the time when you need to earn the money to keep your company going. And that's always assuming that you can take the boat out of service at the current time, between now and 1st of January, and if you can find the engineers, which are in exceedingly short supply across the industry. We've been looking for engineers for 3 years, have failed miserably to find engineers that can come and work in our company. So it's a very short skill base, and I think it's something that we need to look about it, as an industry to bring those skills back into the marine industry. And they are necessary to do the job when you want it. In conclusion, careful planning and good housekeeping, we're told, can minimise the risks involved in changing fuels. Other red diesel users have had time to plan for the change, but since the government did not include us in its original consultations and industry discussions, we have to do it all in a matter of weeks, without the practical testing I think is needed to ensure a smooth transition. We face an uphill climb if we are to operate business as usual in the new year, particularly since we're still operating our normal services with quite a large proportion of our fleet operating all year, and that's the same in a lot of the industries in the business in London, that we have become not a seasonal operation. We are now an all-year operation, and that tends to be the trend around the country as well. Wherever they can find the business in the winter, they will operate 12 months of the year. So you have enormous problems putting even 1 or 2 boats out to get this work done. And of course, it includes one of the busiest times of the winter, where we are able to at least have the opportunity to get some more business, which is Christmas and New Year, which for some companies keeps them going right the way through the winter. The best planning in the world can't overcome the extra cost burden which every operator will face, and there's no magic formula for that except extra business in an economy which is suffering from a recession, and people's spending is on this sort of thing is not as high as it was. So I think there are real issues that operators are going to face around the UK and in London and in our cities and coastal towns. The new fuels are undoubtedly good for the environment, and I know that that's the way that we have to move, but I think that this could have and should have been better planned for introduction. There should be a longer lead time for implementation. I'm exceedingly worried that we will be in a position to actually comply or to run any boats on the 1st of January 2011. So the introduction is far from plain sailing for us. So I hope you find the rest of today's seminar helpful, and that we might get some meaningful answers to tell us how we're going to comply with this in the time left to us. Thank you.